Hi, friends. Welcome back. As a content creator on the internet, I get my fair share of opinions on the way that I eat because that's what I share a lot of on my channel. I eat a lot of meat, and dietitians are some of my biggest critics, especially on Instagram when I participated in TikTok. That was a big thing over there. Dietitians have some very strong opinions when it comes to keto, ketovore, and carnivore. In fact, several of my friends whose only focus on social media is sharing their journey with carnivore have come under a lot of scrutiny and have had videos where these people are just coming after them, saying how unhealthy they are, and this is dangerous information, and you're a danger to humanity. None of these creators that I've seen are telling people that they have to go carnivore. They're simply sharing their experience and their health wins with other people. Because once you have healed your body, you want to scream it from the top of your lungs because most of us felt like there was no hope. We felt like this was just the cards that we were dealt and the path we were supposed to go down. We were just going to be sick and we had to suffer, and that was just that. Take a handful of medications, and maybe you might feel a little bit better. But in the long run, this is it. This is what you have. And so when we went meat based or carnivore and found that it not only improved our health issues, but cured some of them as well, yeah, we want to talk about it. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a dietitian in our corner supporting this way of eating? Well, we do. We actually have several. But today's guest is my good friend Michelle Hurn, who's a registered dietitian, licensed dietitian, and author of The Dietitian's Dilemma, which you can find on Amazon. I will link it in the description for you guys. It's a wonderful read. It's very emotional, but it's factual, fact-based, and she does a wonderful job of laying out the power and healing that comes from a carnivore diet. Not only is Michelle super active on social media and authoring new books, but she also sits on the board of directors for the American Diabetes Society. I'm so happy and grateful that Michelle took the time to talk to me today. Before we get into the interview, a little shout out to the sponsor of today's video, my very favorite electrolytes, Element. Salt is often demonized by dietitians as well. And Michelle has a whole section in her book where she talks about salt and how really salt is so good for you, and sugar is really the white seasoning that you should be concerned about. Element electrolytes are very high in sodium. They have 1,000 milligrams of sodium. They have, always have to look at the pack. They have 200 milligrams of potassium and 16 milligrams of magnesium. They are super tasty if you want to use the flavors. They have many different flavors, but they also have the raw, unflavored version, which has no sweeteners at all and is just pure electrolytes. The flavored ones are sweetened with stevia, so most people are okay with those as well if they're on a keto or low carb carnivore diet. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any purchase, including their new product, which is the sparkling electrolytes that come in a can, and they're pre-mixed and you can just put them in your refrigerator. They're very handy if you're someone who is on the go. So if you go to the link on the screen or in the description, drinklmnt.com/Nisha, you can get sent this free sample pack with 8 different flavors, including the raw unflavored and their chocolate salt, which is super delicious. So thank you so much again to Element for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the interview. Thank you, Michelle, for being on my channel. Before we get into the questions, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and why you chose a career of being a dietitian.
Yeah, just real briefly, my health history really started when I was 12. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I was 5 feet tall and 57 and a half pounds. So I ended up in inpatient treatment for 2 months. And, at that time, I was given a pretty grim diagnosis. I was told if I did survive, I would likely have all kinds of health problems. I remember a psychiatrist telling me that, if I did survive, this was going to be my new lot in life. Like I would probably constantly have racing thoughts around food. I might never grow. Like I said, I was 5 feet tall. And yeah, I remember even thinking as a young person, like, oh my God, I'm going to just have to be this like high functioning person with an eating disorder. And they weren't wrong. I was fed the standard American diet, put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. And interestingly, tube feeding, I was 12. The ingredients back then were, corn syrup solids, maltodextrin, soy protein, canola oil. And it's the same today. I'm 41 now. So years later. And I mean, there are some better tube feeding formulas out there, but, in my experience as a dietitian, they're never covered by insurance. So you're looking at about $1,500 a day if you want to purchase those on your own. But yeah, so, I did become weight restored, but, I dealt with chronic anxiety, depression, had bouts of suicidal ideation, self-injury. But I thought that if I became a dietitian, if I really understood like what food is doing in the body, like, could I heal myself? I had heard stories of people getting better, like their anxiety got better, their depression got better. And, to be a dietitian, you get your 4-year degree in dietetics and then you go through an internship. And when I was in the dietetic internship, there were just things that, my preceptor was saying that just didn't make sense. We'd like go into the room with somebody with type 2 diabetes and they would say like, okay, we're going to teach them how to eat carbohydrates consistently throughout the day. And I would be like, well, wait, shouldn't we teach them how to eat less carbohydrates? Don't they have high blood sugar? And, my preceptor would say like, oh, no, it's all about, balance. It's all about teaching people how to utilize and balance carbohydrates. And, then we went into the room with somebody who had just been in a traumatic car accident. And I remember flipping over the tube feed ingredients and being like, oh my gosh, it's the same stuff. And, here we are years later. And yeah, so I mean, that was my path to becoming a dietitian. And it was hard because working in acute care, you just see the cycle of sickness. People come in, in my experience, most people were really trying to follow the dietary guidelines and they were just getting worse. People would go from having type 2 diabetes to having infections and needing amputations. And oh my God, now they're in chronic kidney failure. But, it wasn't really until 2019, I personally lost my own health that I completely shifted how I ate. And that's, kind of led to where we are today.
So your book, I have it here, The
Oh,
Dietitian's
thank you.
Dilemma, really dives into that whole journey. But I really think the heart of this book is you and your story and finding health, and not necessarily the dilemma of being a dietitian, but the dilemma that you overcame by your past history with your relationship with food and overcoming that and moving forward. So just a little, if you haven't read this book, you really need to. It's amazing. And so you brought up one of the words I wanted to talk to you about. Dietitians have a lot of words that are used that basically mean nothing. So words like moderation and balanced diet. And what do you have to say about dietitians using words like moderation and balanced diet and not really getting into the root causes of food and how they can affect our health?
Moderation is a completely arbitrary term, meaning you can ask 10 different people, what does that mean? And you'll get 10 different answers. Does it mean you eat processed foods once a week, once a year, twice a week, twice a day? Nobody knows, which is ridiculous. And when it comes to balanced, it's once again, it's a term like you stated so eloquently. It doesn't mean anything. It's not actually addressing the root problem, the root cause, which is metabolism. If you don't address metabolism, and we've seen this clearly in like physical ailments like type 2 diabetes, but what we're finding, especially with some of the new clinical trials and case studies that we have coming out, that if you don't address metabolism of mental health disorders, like eating disorders, bipolar disorder, major depression, and anxiety, then you're asking for the person to continue suffering or relapse. And I also want to say, like, how condescending to tell somebody with bulimia or binge eating disorder, like, yeah, why don't you just try eating all things in moderation? Like, they probably haven't tried that 18,000 times.
Right. That's not maybe how this all started.
Exactly. Exactly.
So another thing that you and I are both on social media. You and your wife Corinne make the best videos over there. And I know,
Thank you.
I know you must probably get some trolls in the comments. I definitely get trolls in the comments, but I also they
Yes,
pop up on
absolutely.
my screen. The dietitians giving moderation, balanced diet advice, and they really hound on that. You shouldn't cut out one food group. You need all the food groups. In the beginning, we were like, we were demonizing sugar, and now we've pushed it to we're demonizing plants. And do you think that's counterproductive to bring people to this movement?
No, I certainly don't think it's counterproductive, but as a dietitian, I remember one of the dietitians that I worked under when I first started, he said, It was one of his goals to help people eat as many vegetables as possible. He said, you can never have too much fiber. Fiber is great. Fiber stabilizes blood sugar, fiber, fiber, fiber. And one thing that I found so interesting, and I would lean on like historians like Mary Reddick and people looking at anthropology, is throughout history people didn't eat a lot of plants. And plants today look nothing like they did throughout history. Plants were very small, they had minimal carbohydrates, minimal sugars, and they were often like fillers, meaning people would eat them in times of famine. It wasn't like a, people weren't going around having like quinoa kale salad, back throughout evolution. We literally evolved as humans eating the megafauna, eating these large animals, eating meat, fat, and organs. That's what was calorie dense and protein dense and nutrient dense. But from people looking on the outside, they can say like, why would you eliminate vegetables? And I I have to confess, when I first transitioned to a low carbohydrate diet, it was my original intention to be ketogenic. Saying like, okay, I want to do a ketogenic diet. And then when I heard about the carnivore diet, that was my first reaction, was like, okay, wait, I can get behind the meat thing, but why are y'all cutting out vegetables? Like this,
Right.
I don't get this. But when you dive a little deeper, when you look at like, okay, what do vegetables do in the human body? You realize, one, they're not very bioavailable, meaning your body doesn't really absorb the nutrition from vegetables very well. I like to use the analogy, if I wrote you a check, say, hey, Nisha, I'm writing you a check for $1,000. And you're like, oh, sweet, man, I'm going on a shopping spree. Let's go. And you go to cash the check and they're like, oh, she's got $17 in her bank account. You'd be like, oh, I mean, it doesn't matter what I wrote you for. It matters, can you access the funds? Just like vegetables, it doesn't matter if it says it has this much, vitamin C or whatever. Can your body actually use it? Mm-hmm. And we found that so much of the nutrition in vegetables is really not used by the body very well. And to kind of add like insult to injury, vegetables have a lot of anti-nutrients. And dietitians hate this word. They're like, it doesn't exist. No, it not only exists, but it's very, very important, because most people are coming from a place of like extreme sickness. It's no shock to anybody that our society is obese. We have all kinds of mental health issues. We have all kinds of autoimmune issues. So what do we need to do to reverse that? We need to have the most bioavailable nutrition possible. And what are in plants? Fiber. The number one vitamin and mineral deficiency worldwide is iron. Well, what binds to iron? Fiber. Fiber and phytic acid are two things that bind to iron. And, obviously vegetables are very high in fiber, but grains and seeds and nuts are very high in phytic acid. That's another anti-nutrient. Then you have things like lectins and oxalates. And we even know like the nightshade vegetables for some people can cause all kinds of, inflammation. And so when it comes to eating disorders, what I actually find it interesting. There's an actual case study that I could send to you that, God bless the person that did this. They actually showed that somebody who with anorexia or that had been bulimic actually had a damaged gastrointestinal epithelium, meaning you starve yourself and you binge and purge, your system's messed up.
Shocker.
But like my 9-year-old niece could tell you that, right? Like, yeah, that makes sense. But so in that case, though, what would you do? Like if you had a major like cut on your arm, you wouldn't take like a, bristle pad and like go against it. That's what fiber does to your system. We need to be very gentle to these damaged systems. We need to be eating things that are, you're gonna absorb it very well. It's not gonna cause any pain or harm. In my overwhelming experience, those things come from animals, not plants.
You talk about this in your book as well when you were, I can't remember what chapter it was, but you listed out the diet that they would give someone who was struggling with anorexia, the refeed diet. And it was something like 3,000 calories and chocked full of fruits and vegetables. And you very eloquently put how should this be what we are feeding someone who is so depleted of nutrients? And shouldn't we be giving them something that is nutrient dense and highly bioavailable? And that's exactly what you're saying now. And Dr. Berry, he teaches the PhD spectrum, right? So we love to say, most people start at paleo when they're trying to find, or Mediterranean, then they kind of lean into keto as we did. And then they are like, carnivore, it seems crazy, but then they give it a go. And voila, they feel amazing if they're doing it properly. So when it comes to mental health and all the stones that are thrown in our restrictive diets and Oh, the word orthorexia gets brought up a lot in my comment section, that I'm orthorexic and this is not healthy because I am afraid to eat foods and demonize them and all of that. And if you are someone who's come like you are, who had an eating disorder, what is the difference between true orthorexia, which you state in your book is not actually a diagnosis that is listed at this point, but it's a term that gets thrown around by dietitians a lot and
Yes.
lay people as well. How do we know the difference between true orthorexia and just understanding how foods are affecting our bodies and knowing that food doesn't treat me right, I'm not going to eat it? What's the big difference there?
Yeah, and when you're speaking, when you're talking about orthorexia, like one thing that popped into my head too is that, the relapse rate for eating disorders is so high, right? We know, depending on what study you look at, they say 50 to 70%. And they're defining relapse as you actually qualify through the DSM-5, not just you engage in behaviors. And so, like you were saying, so many dietitians will say, you can't do a carnivore diet, you can't do a ketogenic diet. That's orthorexic because you're fixated on foods and you're eliminating these food groups. And the irony is when you eliminate food groups, in my experience, you stop becoming fixated on food. What true orthorexia, and I would even say anorexia was, is I thought about food every moment of the day. Like it consumed my entire life, whether I was counting calories, thinking, can I eat that? Can I not eat that? How am I going to feel if I eat that? You're ruminating, thinking. I like to say it like I just felt like I was standing on the sidelines of my own life. It's hard to even participate. It's hard to show up in conversations. It's hard to have a job. It's hard to have a relationship because you are constantly fixated on food. Your life revolves around food. If you miss a meal or snack, you freak out. If you think you overate, you freak out. If you think you under, like, it's just this hell that you're living in. Where when you follow a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, that actually addresses the root cause. That's actually addressing metabolism. What you do is you finally like stabilize your blood glucose, and the feeling of calm you have when you do that is incredible. You don't even necessarily have to be in nutritional ketosis to do that, but a lot of people are. And when you're refeeding somebody with anorexia, the standard American diet, and it has all this sugar and all this carbohydrates, you're constantly getting these blood sugar spikes and crashes and spikes and crashes. And that not only exacerbates anxiety, in my experience, what happens is as soon as somebody gets out of treatment, they're like, oh my God, I don't want to feel like that anymore. I'm done. I don't want to eat. So they go back to doing what they were before. Where when you set somebody up, say, hey, we're going to be eating, this is not a low calorie, this is not a weight loss diet. I'm for underweight, young ladies I work with that are underweight on ketogenic or carnivore diets, it's 5,000 plus calories. But when you're eating that way, people say like, oh my gosh, aren't they afraid of fat and afraid of meat? Yeah, initially they are. But when they find the calm, when they find they feel better, their body doesn't hurt, their mind stops for the first time in decades sometimes. They want to keep doing that. So that's the difference, is eating a lot of processed foods, eating the standard American diet and all the sugar not only doesn't address metabolism, in my experience, it exacerbates the problems. There's some research that people with anorexia are actually a little bit sensitive to insulin, meaning they'll have some carbohydrates and they get like pretty intense blood sugar crashes. And so by having so much fat and by having the animal protein, you not only stabilize blood glucose, but you finally get those amino acids that, are going to create the neurotransmitters that are going to allow your brain to synapse and function correctly.
So I know that you did veganism for a while, right?
Yeah, a little while.
How long did you do veganism?
Oh gosh. And I was vegetarian for like, I want to say like 3 or 4 months, and veganism was short lived, like 2 or 3 months. It did not go well.
Do you have a lot of your clients that have been vegan that come to you to do this reintroduction of meat? Do you work closely with those kind of people?
Yeah, veganism is popular. There's so much propaganda around meat is bad for the environment and meat is bad for you. Meat causes cancer, meat causes diabetes. That's my favorite. Meat causes type 2 diabetes. And so people think like, oh my gosh, I need to give up meat, or I need to vastly reduce my meat. And they eat lots of carbohydrates, which depending on where you're coming from, I work with some people who are very obese. Eliminating meat and kicking up the carbohydrates is kind of the worst thing you can do for yourself.
Yeah, I did vegan for probably about the same, like maybe 6 months, and I did raw vegan, which is even worse. But what was interesting is I did feel better, but why did I feel better? I wasn't
Hmm.
eating pizza all day, every day, and I wasn't going to the Doritos.
Yeah,
And, I
that's
was
the worst, right?
I was a LPN at the time, working in long-term care, had very little time on my hands. So yeah, obviously when I stopped eating processed foods, I did feel better, but then I stopped feeling better. And what I craved mostly was bacon. And if you, those of you who watch me, bacon is a big part of my diet. Do you do you think the type of meat matters if you are doing something that is keto or carnivore? Like, is poultry okay? Do you need the grass-fed, grass-finished? Do you find that it's okay for some people to start just focusing on eating meat, and then a lot of people maybe continue on and move towards just beef, or do some people just do better on many different cuts of meat?
Yeah, I feel like, when it comes to human nutrition, I feel like the base is similar for everybody, right? Like if we all could just get behind, we're going to have a mostly saturated fat animal-based diet, we'd be fine. And then there are some nuances. I worked with somebody that had such severe autoimmune issues. I mean, I'm talking like skin covered and, just joint inflammation, diagnosed osteoarthritis. That for them, they really wanted to do something similar to like Michaela Peterson had done, right? I really want to do just this beef, salt, water. I think for 99% of the population, that's probably unnecessary, and that can feel like really intense going from maybe what you were doing before. I know Korea, my wife, she did like 6 months of a lot of bacon, very little other things, and just loved it. I was able to stabilize her blood sugar, lose some weight. Interestingly, labs looked really good. So yeah, I do think I can actually, I used to be like, it has to be all ruminant animals because we just eat so much good nutrition in the ruminants, and like I said, iron is the number one vitamin and mineral deficiency worldwide. So getting that beef, getting that lamb, if you like that, venison. But the more I've kind of researched this, I'm seeing things like pork is really high in thiamine. Bacon is delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, I'm such a boring cook. Like if I'd probably just do beef. But I think rotating in some chicken thighs, rotating in like if you have access to other meats that you like, whether that's a lamb or goat or I think that's what's most crucial. I get kind of irritated when I hear people arguing like, oh, it has to be grass finished. Like, let's stop. Like, no, it doesn't. Like, get what you can afford and what you enjoy, because that's what you're going to do sustainably. Like if you absolutely hate beef, which is rare, but I've had someone who told me like, I will not eat beef. Okay, well, this woman loves salmon. So she ate a ton of salmon and chicken and oysters and she was fine. So how silly would it have been for me to be like, no, you must eat beef? So once again, can we get that foundation? And then from there, we can kind of work on the nuances.
Right. So you mentioned the word sustainability. That's another thing that gets thrown around in the comment section is this isn't sustainable. And I feel like they think that word means something different than how maybe we see that word, because you're
Mm.
assuming when you say that to somebody, this isn't sustainable, that the way they were doing it or eating a standard American diet is sustainable. And if you have a mental health disease or eating disorder, something like that, that's not sustainable. You can't continue on that way. I mean, when you have been at rock bottom, some people haven't been, but if you have been, that's not sustainable. So
Absolutely.
I love when that comment gets brought up, because I love to be like, what do you think sustainable means? Because really, this is not a diet, this is a lifestyle for me, and I think for many of us who have found the carnivore way of eating, this is what's sustaining us to keep us from going down a very dark path. How do you feel about that?
I 100% agree. I mean, it really comes down to like, get a little philosophical. Like, what do you want to do with your life, right? Like for me, the only thing I want to do is I want to chase what I'm passionate about, and obviously it's advocating this. I'm a long distance runner, so it's racing and helping others. And so I feel like food, how you eat should support that. And that's it. It shouldn't be this worry or this huge ordeal or this, oh, I eat and I feel awful, or oh, I eat and I'm starving 2 hours later. It should literally be something that you do and move on. And I think it's so funny when people say this isn't sustainable, because just like you said, I'll tell you what wasn't sustainable. And it's how I was living certainly when I was severely anorexic, but, as recently as 2017, I was, training really hard, eating a very high carbohydrate, high sugar diet. And I was dealing with suicidal ideation, like pretty serious mental health stuff. That is very not sustainable. So,
Exactly.
I've been eating this way since 2019.
It's
And
almost insulting for people to come and say things like this isn't sustainable. It's like you don't understand what that means to some of the people who, like you and I, found this way of eating to keep us out of that dark place, because I was there as well. And I
Mhm.
know many people in the community are struggling with mental health, and this is the only sustainable diet that keeps us going, happy, healthy. And even when we have it's keeping us from giving in to the stress that we can't get rid of. We have to be able to manage it. And when you're sick and inflamed, you can't manage your stress. In your book, you mostly focus on mental health, but I watched your presentation, I think it was in Las Vegas, and you've turned your focus to talking about cancer a little bit. Can you talk a little
Yes.
bit about that?
Yeah, I kind of had the shock of my life this past December. When I published the Dietitian's Dilemma, I didn't write a chapter on cancer. I felt like I wanted to write chapters on specific disease states that I felt like not only I had experience working with pretty intimately in the hospital setting, but I felt like, wow, the evidence is really there. Like in cancer, I was like, oh gosh, I don't know. This feels like this could be from so many other facets. And then in November of 2023, Korean is a director of a local hospital here, a director of pathology. They had a work presentation and she came home and said, oh, we need to get mammograms. Like, we haven't got them yet. And, I'm thinking like, come on, I don't need another. You're so busy. I don't, all right, fine, let's do that. So, we both got our first mammogram, and I'll never forget. I was literally, playing with my shepherd when she came home and said, I have cancer. And that moment like changed my life. So, but I'm grateful, Nisha. I'm so grateful. Like I think about people in that moment just feeling like helpless and I don't know what to do. And I knew what to do. I immediately knew what to do. We had heard Miriam, who published the book Keto for Cancer. We heard her speak at a conference. So I immediately called her and said, hey, I need to talk to you. Like, we need your help. And she was like, yep, getting on a call tomorrow. And so Corrine immediately went on a therapeutic, calorie restricted ketogenic diet. Most people who are coming to carnivore or keto don't need to be that strict, in my opinion, or don't need to necessarily test ketones. But it was like, you know, pedal to the metal. Like, Korean, it's like, you like a glass of wine every once in a while? Not anymore. Not, you like a little bit of carbohydrates? And not, I mean, she had a better attitude, I think, than I would have. Like, she tested her ketones every day. This was the first time that she had to restrict protein because, protein can go back through gluconeogenesis to create glucose. But just like so many other disease states I've researched, it was hard because you just get so angry. We have the research. I actually emailed with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and he was just so kind to give me some of his time that, showing cancer cells increase their ability to uptake glucose. You literally can see on a cancer cell and like normal cells, they get more glucose receptors.
Right.
But the American Cancer Society says like, sugar doesn't feed cancer. Carbohydrates don't feed cancer.
Yeah.
So it was hard and it was scary. And, in total, between all the appointments we went to, you have to see an oncologist and a radiologist and surgeon and then the nurses. I mean, we saw 32 different people within the entirety of her treatment, and only one said anything about nutrition. And you don't, you can imagine.
So disappointing, isn't it?
Yes. And her advice was don't eat any animal fat. So
I know that that was a very stressful time, but it seems like you were able to really be there and support her and be strong. And do you think your diet played a part in that? Do you think if this had happened back when you were still having your panic attacks, that you would have been able to play that strong of a role for her?
no, I don't think I would have. And I do think I have, there are moments that I think like this is why I'm following this diet. Like, because obviously, I mean, I'm so grateful for my physical healing and I'm grateful I can run again. But just the simple things like we need to be able to handle stress. Life gets hard. I have issues with my parents. I have issues, you're gonna have issues with work or finances. But when your partner having cancer, I was able to mentally be there and mentally hold it together while also working and doing other things. Where I think in the past I would have crumpled, or I would have definitely not been able to show up as effectively as I did,
Right.
you know. And when I was a high carbohydrate human, not only was I super inflamed, but I also, you're constantly eating, you're constantly snacking. And it was kind of, it's not funny, but when she had her surgery, I didn't eat that morning. We got her there really early, but things got delayed. And so I didn't actually get to eat my first meal until almost 3 o'clock,
Yeah.
and that was fine. No big deal. But when I was a high carb person, I would have been losing my mind as opposed to taking care and showing up. That's probably the biggest thing that I wish dietitians would take time to hear, is that it's not just, even physical healing, but this is going to make you just an all around better person. You're a more mentally healthy, physically present human.
Yeah, I think that gets bypassed a lot. The amount of us who are really have that potential to have that high anxiety and panic attacks and things like that, and being put in situations where you're able to actually maintain your sanity, which is not something you should take for granted. Like, diet is so important, and the world is crazy. It's like, it's not going to get any better, probably.
Mm.
And so I think we really must focus on making sure that we're not eating our feelings with these types of situations, because I want to. I mean, every now and then I'm like, I'm just going to go. I'm going to buy a bag of Doritos and no one will know. Nobody will know, but I will know. And my brain will
Yeah.
know. And before I know it, I'm almost on the verge of a panic attack. If I did that, I could not function well as a mother and a leader in this household. So it's so much more than just like, I want to live a very long time. It's, I want to be the best I can be right now. And that's another thing, is a lot of people are like, well, you're healthy now, but in 10 years, then you're going to have a heart attack. And that goes back again to what we were talking about, sustainability. Like, in 10 years, if I went back to eating just processed, even if I just went back to eating pasta and grains and brown rice and quinoa and the things I ate while I was paleo, who says I would make it 10 more years with mental health issues?
Yeah.
Like,
The mental
it,
health issue thing is the number one for me, like why I want to continue to do this. Cause like you said, physically, I'm an athlete, I'm lean, people are like, oh, you could eat cake or you could eat whatever. And yeah, from like I guess physical, I'm not going to become obese eating that way, probably if I did that for a short period of time. But the increase in anxiety is very quick. How these foods impact our mental health. It's interesting now that I've been away from that for so long. If I if I do eat something less than ideal, I can feel it almost instantly. And like you said, it's beyond us. And I think that's something that it requires a little bit of humility and a little bit of like just respect, because it's, when we're healthier, we're a better spouse, we're a better like parent, we're better for our community, we're better leaders, and when we don't, it's a problem.
now I want to ask you a kind of fun question. So,
Yay.
your background and my background look similar. It's almost like we enjoy books or something. So, can you tell me your favorite book, besides yours, that you would recommend, that you would recommend for someone who is wanting to learn more about this?
Oh my goodness.
There's so many to choose, aren't
I
there?
was gonna say there's so many, and I'm only partway through Dr. Palmer's book.
Yeah, that's a
Gosh,
good one.
I'll tell you the ones that come to mind. Obviously, Ken has the book, Lies My Doctor Told Me. And then Chris Palmer, Brain Energy is one that I've just started. Well, I'm like partway through it. Ben Bickman has a really good book. Why We Get Sick. That's another one that I really appreciated and enjoyed. And I think he does do a really good job of breaking it down, making it easy to explain. There are a lot of books out there, but sometimes they get a little too technical, and so I think like
Yes.
kind of lose
Yes.
people a little bit here. But I mean, those
Uh-huh.
are three that, that I would recommend. And I mean, all those people I have such tremendous respect for. End Your Low Carb Confusion is another really good one. Dr. Westman and Amy Berger, like she co-wrote that.
Yeah. No, those are great suggestions. I love interviewing people and I love listening to interviews, but I want people to take on the responsibility of reading these kinds of books, including Michelle's right here,
Yay. Thank
because you
you.
get so much context from what we're talking about, so much more context when you really see the full story. And this This book is great. If you're interested in following Michelle, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net, and you can contact me through there if you're interested in setting up a consult or you just have questions. I'm certainly happy to chat. I'm also on Instagram at Run Eat Meat Repeat, and I'm on Twitter at Michelle Hurn RD.
Amazing. Do you have any runs coming up?
I do. I have my next race, kind of like your A race. The one I'm really focusing on is in Chicago on November 2nd. So it is a 50-mile race, and I because I'll put it out there. It's my goal to win. So I'm gonna have to run faster than I ever have to accomplish that. But I think it's very possible. So I'm doing a marathon, just a kind of like a training race in September, but the actual big race is in November.
Wow, amazing. Well, I'll be watching to see if you win. I bet you do. So good luck. And thank you so
Thank
much
you.
again for being on my channel.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Michelle Hurn. I'll have all of her information linked in the description, and I'll put another video over here in case you haven't watched it. Thanks so much, and I will see you in the next one. Love you, mean it.